I'm going to show off the new Netlify Graph beta and show how it works step by step, starting with a Next.js application. This will also work with any application you can deploy to Netlify, but I'll just use Next.js for this example. First things first, let's go ahead and start up our dev server with Graph. This will provision all of the resources necessary for the Graph to actually function. And you can see that upon starting up, it lets me know that I can edit my application here. And inside of here, I get a sense of what Graph is. I can go ahead and just connect. And for the purpose of this demo, I'll go ahead and just connect to GitHub. And I can connect in two different ways. I can add some server-side authentication in case I want to hit this API directly. But in my case, I actually just want to go ahead and hit the Graph Explorer directly. So let's go ahead and start querying. You can see that it notices that I'm developing locally on my locked up already. So I'll go ahead and jump into there. And I'm presented with a Graph Explorer. It starts with this an example query. And I'll call this issues. And I'll go into GitHub. And I can go ahead and go into repository. I can go ahead and pull out the owner and the name as variables. We'll just go ahead and make those both required. And I want to get a list of issues for a given repository. Let's go ahead and just get the open issues. I'll get the total count. And let's go ahead and make first a variable in case I want to get a different amount. We'll make it a default of just 1 for now, but we can pass it in if we want. I'll then grab the edges and nodes for pagination. And let's go ahead and grab the ID. We'll grab the URL, the title, and the body HTML. To start with, I want to make sure that this actually looks correct. So I'll go ahead and run this. And you can see that I'm not logged into GitHub. So I can go ahead and log into GitHub here. And now whenever I run this, you can see that this actually checks to make sure that we're providing the appropriate variables. So if I come in here and I say owner is sgrove, and we'll do the name is blog, I run that, you can see I'm actually able to get a list of my open issues. And maybe I want to change that so that instead of open, I just get all of them. So go ahead and run that again, and you can see now I'm able to get more of them. And maybe I want to get just the closed issues. I go ahead and run that. You can see that happens as well. In this case, I'll leave it as open. This looks good to me, and I can see that this is now active. I'll go ahead and save my changes, and it'll sync the events. Now back in my CLI, you can see that it noticed that we enabled GitHub here, and also that we updated our operations. Opening up the code, I have a new folder called lib, and there is a Netlify Graph operations file. And this actually has the issues operation that I just made. And you can see here that states is open. If I want to, I can come in here and actually make that a variable. It defaults to open. I'll go ahead and save that change. Again, that'll sync to my local CLI. And we should see that actually automatically flow through and update here as well. Now inside of my application, say index.js, for example, I can import this file. And this has full autocomplete support now. So if I go ahead and fetch issues, we can see that there's autocomplete. It knows that name and owner are both required. First and states, however, are optional. So let's go ahead and hardcode this to sgrove blog. And if we hover over either of these, you can see actually that we get full docstring support on this. So our API client is actually documented both on the inputs as well as the outputs. Now let's go ahead and get the result of this. And now if we look at the result, we see that we have data and errors. And I have GitHub, repository, issues. And again, at each step along the way here, we have the full type of it as well as the doc strings. Now the thing is, we can't actually call into this API without any sort of authentication. So there's an option here to pass in an access token. And here's where we would use our Netlify Graph token. But we don't currently have one of these. And actually in this case, I'd like to pull the authentication from the client. Whoever's actually using this application on the client side should be providing me with a token that I can use with this API call. Now that's going to take a little bit of work, but luckily Netlify Graph actually makes that fairly easy for us. We can come in here and under actions, we can say generate handler. And this will actually pay attention to the framework we're using, the language, and actually generate us an API page that has everything built in. So it knows where a Netlify Graph is, it knows how to parse the incoming client requests, and importantly, it actually generates us a full endpoint here. So we can actually go to our web page, and if we visit this, we see that it's actually generated a full form with us including required and optional fields, as well as enum fields. So let's go ahead and try this out. We'll get the same idea, just the first one. And if I submit that, I'm not actually logged into GitHub. The form that we generated actually knows how to do this for Next.js and says, hey, you need to log into GitHub in order to run this. Then after logging in, it'll actually run the query again. But we have one last change to make, and that is on our API side. By default, we don't use any access tokens. But it tells us actually, if you want to use the client's access token, you can simply uncomment this. So if we come back and we resubmit that, you can see we're actually getting our API response back. We can change this so that we get 2 back. If we don't provide a required field, we're actually going to see that the generated form actually does server-side validation of the inputs. And this also works for mutations. Let's go ahead and create a new mutation. We'll call this add comment. Go into GitHub. We will add a comment. We'll make the subject ID as well as the body variables that need to be passed in. And for the purposes of this, we'll just go ahead and get the comment edge back. We'll get the ID as well as the body HTML of the comment back. So this looks good for me. I'll save that, and I will also generate a handler. But in this case, instead of doing this in JavaScript, what I'd like to do is go ahead and change this to use TypeScript. So as soon as I change this to TypeScript, so now if I come in here and I generate handler, back to our API handler, you can see that now it's actually using TypeScript automatically. And everything that is in here is properly typed, so we can be sure that there won't be any runtime errors. So if we're using TypeScript or JavaScript, it automatically detects that and just works with it. Now let's go back to our issues form, and we'll go ahead and run this query, and we'll get the ID of this issue. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and pull up this issue alongside it as well. Now if I come over to our add comment form, I'll leave a comment like, hello Netlify Graph, and I'll go ahead and submit that. And we see that it pops up here, as well as popping up down here. I'll send that one more time. You can see that end-to-end, we're able to come in, have fully typed applications that work. We can explore APIs, add them, enable authentication, generate forms, basically handle all of the boilerplate that our team would have to do whenever interacting with one of these outside services.